Welcome, everyone, to the Masculine Wilderness Podcast. I am Tom Perez. I'm the founder of the Epic Project and the host of this ongoing conversation. In past episodes, we've had the privilege of having a lot of women that have had a huge impact on the work that we do at Epic. And today I'm excited because it's a conversation with a man, a friend, a brother who has had, for me personally, just similar influence in the work that we're doing or trying to do in the way we show up. Ken Wytsma is an accomplished author. This is your sixth book, right? By my count, just came out with the book called "The Sleep You're Longing For," and that's the thing we want to talk about today, Ken. But can you just give us a little bit of your backstory? Tell us a little bit about where you are now and kind of what you're up to besides writing books.
Yeah, sure. My background obviously is in ministry, but also in social justice space with trying to argue for the religious and the biblical mandate to love others in all different ways, especially those who are vulnerable. And was able to write several books that way and even get into some history of race and theology in America. But through doing relief and development work, kind of contracted some diseases and then a lot of medicines to get rid of those. It triggered Crohn's disease. So for me, the last really decade or more has been fighting chronic illness. And so when the publisher reached out and said if I had a book in me and they wanted to publish another book, I said the only thing I'd want to write on would be sleep. And I thought they would kind of pass on that. But they said, tell us more. So I told them more. And then 2 years later, here's this book. But I just feel like sleep or rest in a larger category is such a big part of life and a big part of the struggle that we face when we're trying to overcome and have something to contribute to the world and to the people around us.
One of the things I've always respected and admired about you and the work you do is the way you. I know it requires effort as I've gotten to know you. I know it requires a lot of work, but it seems like the outward experience of Ken Weitzma is the kind of this intersection, very natural intersection of history, philosophy, spirituality, just like practical wisdom. Like you blend all of those things in a way that's really, really accessible, and I appreciate that. And so this, I kind of want to go into that with you just in the time we have and talk about this idea of rest. What So the book came out in, I forget,
A little over a month ago, yeah.
it's very, very recently. Um, how long was that project for you though? Like how long did it take you to, you know, begin thinking about it from start to finish? Like, what does that process look like?
Yeah, my other books were all things that I'd lectured on, given talks on, taught college courses on. So in some ways, they were the history of kind of my thought. This book, you could really say was, uh, in terms of background, my whole life. It was, this is a very different book in terms of kind of. I'm not an expert on sleep. I'm an expert on sleeplessness, and this was kind of a journey to walk with me as I tried to sort that out. And so context wise, my whole life, but it was a little bit more than 2 year process with several delays and missed deadlines, and was a tough book to put onto paper in a way that I thought would be helpful for people. A quick context is when I was really at my worst with insomnia, everyone kept recommending books to me, and they were all written by medical doctors, and I'm sure they were all very great books. But by the first chapter, I'd feel so guilty, like I
Mm.
was failing. Here's 1,000 things I should be doing different, and I'm failing at every one of them. and it just made me feel more stressed, more anxious. And so I'd always kind of put them away in the first chapter. And so this book was really me trying to write the book I would have needed or wanted or would have been helpful for me.
Yeah.
A much more grace based and normalizing book. There's a couple billion people that are going to struggle with sleep tonight. We're not the only ones.
Yeah.
And so that's really the context. But like you said, bringing in history, religion, philosophy, culture, neuroscience, psychology, trying to just walk around sleep and look at it from every angle.
What were some of the things just as a man? That's what struck me about when I knew you were writing this book. What struck me immediately is here's a man writing about rest, and as you unpack the thoughts in the book, it obviously intersects with from our tradition, ideas like Sabbath and all that kind of stuff. But as a man, like what were the obstacles, things that maybe you were conditioned to think, ways you were conditioned to think as a man that worked against what you were learning about rest?
Yeah, I think your audience would know what all those things are, right? The sense of helplessness or weakness or being a failure or whatever it ends up being. And really what I was fighting against was stress about stress. So I think one of the most helpful things for me was running across a TED talk by one of the leading experts on stress and what it does to the human body. And real quick, she basically was giving the TED talk saying that for 20 years she went around the world telling people that stress was killing them. And then she ran across a study that ended up changing everything she thought. And that study and the further studies that she did kind of on her own showed that stress itself doesn't kill us, that we're resilient, that we have the capacity, that it in some ways helps focus us into really good productivity or fighting back or whatever it might be, harnessing that resilience within us. But what was killing us was stress about stress. That somehow that unique form of kind of internal stress, uh, constricted blood vessels, raised blood pressure, and all of the things that she'd been identifying medically that were harming us were actually due to this unique form of stress about stress, not difficulty itself.
Yeah.
And I think that was to your question. I think that was the hardest thing that as a man and being below the line that I felt like I should be at to be able to perform for society, for my family, for myself, created this internal stress about stress that spun me out in all sorts of different ways. And again, that's why I think normalizing this challenge, normalizing that experience, allows people not to have that internal anxiety that naturally arises when we feel like we're failing.
Right. I had never heard it framed that way. It's stress about stress. But how do you answer the cultural, I don't know, maxim is probably a good way to describe it, but the "I'll sleep when I'm dead," which seems to be very common,
Yeah,
probably so among men. How do you
yeah,
respond to that? What have you learned?
yeah. It's interesting. In some of the conversations I've had since the book came out, almost every single man that's been in the military says that their commanders would always say, "You can sleep when you're dead. We've got work to do. You can sleep when you're dead." And so it's it's a form of seeing us as not made in the image of God or having, if you're not religious, having dignity and worth in terms of human rights. It's not seeing us fundamentally as valuable in and of ourselves. It's seeing us only as having utility,
Hmm.
um, and that is the only thing people want from us. They don't want us to show up as our best selves. They don't want us to show up happy and enjoying what we do. They don't care about the emotions. They want to extract the utility that we bring to whatever it might be. And if someone's paying you a paycheck, they feel like they have a right to that or that they own that. And it's very much a post-industrial kind of framework.
So I was
And
going to ask, like, where does that come from? Yeah.
yeah, Thomas Edison was famous for saying someday we're not going to need to sleep, or we should try and figure out a way to engineer that out. That it's unhelpful. I mean, his New York Times interview has all these little quotable sayings that really give you a sense of, in that industrial revolution, how much they wanted to drive input, and that's really the only thing that had a bottom line to it. And I think as men who traditionally were the providers, pre World War II, pre birth control, a whole lot of different things, that got put into that cultural psyche, that mentality, that somehow we really are here to produce. And the way we're going to measure ourselves or measure our mettle against other men is whether we're able to produce more. And so, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, Silicon Valley became kind of the epicenter for this whole, I can get by on less sleep than you can. I can
Yeah.
sleep under my desk in my office. I go all the time. That makes me a better investment as an entrepreneur, than people that are going to go sleep for 8 hours, not stay at work. And you can see the logic on the surface, but if you really step back and go, is this a system that's actually functional and going to work in the long run? Most studies these days are saying no, it's not a helpful system. You lose your best energy, you lose your creativity, you lose your health, and in the long run, that's not a good investment.
Yeah. How is how does that uh, trend, that kind of cultural normalization of just drive and productivity and all of that, how does that, I'm specifically mindful of men, like how does that affect our ability to care for ourselves, and to care for others? Like how does that intersect?
We're all different in terms of personality and character, but we do share certain human traits, right? And one of those human traits is that when we feel frustrated, we naturally begin to move towards self pity. And when we feel sorry for ourselves, we, just like children, we want other humans to go through the same experience that we're going through.
Mm.
So there's an embedded thing where this culture gets passed on, because if I don't get enough sleep, then you shouldn't be able to get more sleep as well. And if
Yeah.
you do, I have to tear you down. And so I'm going to say things like, you're lazy, you don't work hard,
Mm.
you're not a real man, because I want everybody to come to my line. In churches, everyone wants the clergy to make living wages, but they don't want them to make more than they make. So everybody has that line. In nonprofits, we want everyone to get paid a lot, but we're jealous if someone gets paid more than us, in a similar position.
Yeah.
So we all have this thing of we don't want to feel like we're less than others, uh, because that's that tension again.
Yeah.
That's that I'm alone. It's not fair, and so we kind of want to lash out. So there's this very human, very childish in some ways impulse within us to say, if I have to get up at 5 a.m. to drive in traffic because I live in Washington, D.C. or L.A. or wherever it might be, well, then you should have to get up at 5 a.m. too. It's not fair if I'm the only one having to do that. And so little by little, when you put all those drops in the bucket, it furthers this sense that even though now we know sleep is really important, there's an overriding deep human psychological impulse to say, everyone else should be at the level I'm at.
Yeah. When when did you start, or when did you recognize, just in your own story, the struggle with sleep? I know you said there was a significant change in your health, but like, what was it like for you as a child, as a young man? What did sleep and rest look like for you, or was it absent?
Yeah, it was really interesting when I did the work to kind of peel back the layers and look at my life. I remember being a very small child and sleeping through thunderstorms and people trying to wake me up to see lunar eclipses, and they couldn't wake me, and slept like a rock kind of thing. And this is like age 6, like
Mm.
very young,
Yeah.
6, 7. Uh, and then that stopped, and it's really interesting. As I reflected on it, I dealt with insomnia most of my life, and it was either through fear, or I think ADHD, which in the 70s, early 80s wasn't a thing, but I very much had it. I couldn't sleep without a fan blowing on my face as a way of white noise, but also calming my nervous system. Without a fan, I'd just lay in bed wide eyed. I don't know that I had the right beds. That's a complicated thing for kids because they don't have the ability to verbalize or even know what a bed would do in that
Yeah.
kind of scenario. I always had light pouring through the blinds. I talk about that in my book, but we kind of had a big security, like a big street lamp in our backyard, and for about a decade, my bedroom always faced the backyard, and so I would have this blue light kind of shining through, um, and that became an issue. If you're thinking in bed and there's light in the room, uh, those two things in combination just keep your mind spinning. But I mean, I could go on and on and on. A paper route in junior high, where I had to get up at 4 a.m. so that I could get the paper to. This is Metro DC, Washington DC, so I could get the paper to the military guys
Wow.
when they were drinking their coffee before they went into work. And so, waking up at 4 a.m, being up for 2 hours, and then going laying down for an hour and 20 before your mom wakes you up, is in some ways earlier than most of the kids on the ranch, right? So I think those things begin to cut grooves in your brain and create patterns. And I think most people that struggle with sleep, there's either a moment or a long kind of arc where habits of what happens at night, what goes through your mind at night, what fears do you think of, the habit of maybe not getting out of the bed and just laying there and spinning. Those kind of can develop earlier on, which is part of the challenge with people that are struggling with sleep. Is it becomes acute when we think about it, and when we're thinking about it, then we want an immediate fix, like a whatever it is, the magic bullet. Um, Hurry up and give me the one thing that's going to fix it. But if it took a long time to develop those sleep issues, it's not going to be solved overnight. So again, normalizing it so that we can
Yeah.
begin to dissect it in a calm manner, but not with this extra anxiety or extra stress.
The stress about stress, like you talked about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. How does this play out through a gendered lens? Like, have you noticed, or what are the unique struggles for men versus women in this on this issue of real consistent rest and sleep?
Well, I think sleeplessness doesn't know gender boundaries, right? I think culture might shape it and how
Yeah.
people perceive it. But in the middle of the night, when you wake up at 3 a.m, which is called the witching hour for a reason, uh, you feel like you're the only person in the world that's going through this kind of isolation, loneliness, helplessness. And so I think at 3 a.m, it doesn't matter what gender you are. And I don't think it matters what culture says. You're just feeling helpless. Like, I want to
Yeah.
sleep, but I can't will it into existence. Sleep is one of those strange things that the harder you try to do it, the less able you are, right?
Yeah, you talk. I can't remember exactly where you talk about a sense of surrender is
Yeah.
important. It's like let it come to you.
Yeah, let it come to you. I think that's when your prefrontal cortex is engaged, and maybe as you go to bed. The problem when we wake up at 3 a.m. and we're lying in a prone position, think of it in terms of evolutionary biology. Our vital organs are exposed. We're laying flat on our back. And when you're laying horizontal like that, your animal brain is dominant. And so that's why when you start thinking at 3 a.m. about all the things you have to do, the financial stress, et cetera, it just loops and loops, and you can go for hours and you're not making progress with anything real, but you're not in control of it. You're not on top of that loop,
Yeah.
right? It just
Yeah.
keeps going and going. And so one of the biggest things that my insomnia specialist taught me was you got to get out of bed. The minute that you stand vertical, you put your prefrontal cortex back in control. So if you go to the bathroom, if you go read a book, if you go walk downstairs, do whatever, don't turn on the lights, don't look at the clock, but just get up and re-engage your prefrontal cortex and then go lay back down the way you would normally lay down when you're going to sleep. You now can get on top of that loop and kind of push it to the side. But
Do you do
laying
it?
in bed wide awake is a bad habit. Go ahead.
Yeah. But what you're describing is not willing yourself back to sleep, but like re-engaging another part of your brain and your body.
No, it's so, they talk about the sleep wave, right? So we fall asleep best when there's kind of a felt sense of we're feeling drowsy. And so if we're wide awake and wired in bed, that sleep wave is never going to come in a natural way that where our minds are kind of disengaged from all this stress, which
Yeah.
is why we'll toss and turn for, the next 4 hours and then get up at 7 a.m. Whereas if you get up, walk downstairs, read a book, even just sit in a chair and do whatever, pretty soon you're going to feel like, I'm kind of tired. I really want to go to bed. And then you get to start the process over, but not with that loop kind of dominating you. And there's some natural things. I take some homeopathics that are valerian based, and they're very mild. Other people take some different herbs or some different supplements, and those might help kind of bring on that drowsiness just a little bit without
Mhm.
affecting you when you wake up.
Yeah.
But most people just grab for the drugs when they go to sleep, or the sleep aids, those kinds of things, or the prescription drugs. And what I've eventually been able to come to is that I can manage that 3 a.m. if and when it happens, kind of in a natural way that allows my body to maximize its rest over the period of a night. And back to your original question, that's incredibly personal, incredibly individual, and really doesn't know any gender boundaries.
Well, you described earlier the stress over stress and the scenario of the 3 a.m. waking, like that has been my life for the last several years, and is exactly what I've been doing until recently. Is I wake up and I'm stressed about not being able to sleep, and so I just I just lay there getting more stressed about being stressed, knowing that 1 o'clock in the afternoon is going to come and I'm going to be useless. And,
Yep.
it's, yeah,
Yeah.
that endless looping is
And
so
you're
real.
and understanding the animal brain, I think, is something we overlook, but it's incredibly helpful because we all have one, and it all kind of functions roughly the same. But when you're awake at 3 a.m. and lying in bed, the animal brain, takes the path of least resistance. It doesn't want to get out of bed. It's comfortable. It's cold when you're outside the covers.
Yeah.
And the logic doesn't seem to make sense. Like if I go get up, then I'm not going to fall asleep again. And, for another hour, I'm a half hour downstairs and then come back upstairs. And so your animal brain goes, the path of least resistance is if I could just fall asleep now. I'm already in bed.
Right.
Let me just stay here. But the animal brain also doesn't know how to turn off its musings, right? Its stress.
Yeah.
It's a fear based. The animal brain is 100% fear based, and so when you let it stay in control, you're just going to continue to loop as if the sky is falling. We all know this, right? At 3 a.m, everything seems insurmountable.
Yeah.
And then when you wake up and you're having breakfast, you're like, you know what? It's just another day. Um,
Yeah.
the problems are real, but they're not, they're not going to kill me.
Right.
But the animal brain deals with kill or be killed. And so
Well,
when you're letting it control you, everything seems like, like the world's going to end.
I yeah, I remember as a kid the whole monsters under the bed, and I feel like even at this point in my life, at that 3 in the morning, at that witching hour, it's like the monsters still feel really real. They're different monsters, now that we're older. The monster of, you know, employment, health, so many different things. I'm curious, as you've been working through it personally. Obviously, you've written about it, you've studied it extensively. What are some of the costs of uh, not dealing with the sleeplessness? There's so many things that mitigate really restful sleep that is just a part of our culture. Like, what are some of the costs that you're seeing of people that are not resting well in our culture?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a medical question. And I know what I've experienced, and I know what I've studied and read. And I think those results are out there for people to access, but I think we all know it intuitively that without rest, we can't, in terms of energy, function for the next day. Our skin begins to look different. We begin to look haggard, and I think we can all extrapolate and say, if those physical manifestations show up after a bad night of sleep, what happens if you prolong that over a good period of time? And if stress about stress is what's killing us, then laying awake in bed stressing about stress is the opposite of getting renewal that we need.
Yeah,
And so a good healthy sleep, you get deep sleep in the early stages. So 10 to midnight, midnight to 3, that's going to be where you get the most amount of deep sleep.
yeah.
And that's kind of the repair, the physical repair part, that's needed for you to live 85, 90, 95 years. Uh, the REM sleep that we get is really flushing out different hormones and different toxins that build up in our brain. Like, we're a machine, right? That's running all day. We're eating all this food, drinking all these drinks, having all these emotions, having adrenaline and cortisol and everything else course through our veins. And that creates byproduct. It's like any machine needs to be managed, right? If it's going to
Yeah.
last. And so that byproduct has to be flushed out. But the biggest one for me is how it packages our emotions and our trauma. When I was on Ambien, and I talk about it extensively in the book, and I don't want to be sued by any drug makers, but and it has a use, right? There's a use for it, but uh, chronic access to Ambien, a prescription like I had for 3-4 years, and that dependency that gets created. I might have been dreaming, but I don't remember dreaming for a whole 2 to 3 year period of heavy trauma in my life. And what happens with traumatic emotions is they have to be date stamped, like located in time, which means it takes both sides of your brain to kind of connect on it. The logical side, the abstract side, to date stamp it and then package it away. That's often why we'll dream about things that are like, wow, it has nothing to do with what's going on in my life, but
Yeah.
thematically, there's some really interesting connection points in that weird dream, and that's your brain making sense and kind of packaging those things down. And if that doesn't happen, it exists in Never Never Land, this traumatic experience. And that's how post-traumatic stress kind of comes to the forefront is it lives as if it's happening to you right now,
Right.
even though it's something that happened to you in the past, right? Like, I'm not in Iraq. I
Body
wasn't
doesn't
a soldier, but go
Yeah.
ahead.
I say the body doesn't know that it happened in the past, it's
Yeah.
reacting.
Yeah, so you're walking around with all those triggers right on the surface, and when something connects into those, it brings all of that. I have to fight for my life. I have to be hyper vigilant because it's all happening to me right now. And so, as you're asking about the damage or the physical, implications of not sleeping, they're pretty profound, and they affect our personality. They affect our ability to show up as our best selves or show up for our family. Um, and if we extended that and said, what about rest? There's so many studies that show that you have to have a down cycle, whether it's a Sabbath day, whether it's just a day off, the weekend off, a vacation, because you have to teach the brain that it doesn't have to stay stuck in the on position. And if you never cycle down, it's as if uh, like a lever or a switch that's never used, it begins to kind of calcify and get stuck, right? And so that's why a lot of people that are overworkers or workaholics, you give them a day off and their bodies are still wound up. Um, they don't actually have the ability to down cycle and rest.
Yeah.
And so if we don't force that for ourselves, and if we don't have a community that creates that space for us, we're never able to really teach our bodies that there's a work-rest balance. I don't like work-life balance. That doesn't make sense to me. Work, rest, those are the two poles. And that's what creates a good life. So I think we could use better language. When we say work life, it often comes across as if someone just doesn't have a good work ethic, And
Yeah.
I think a good work ethic is fine. It just has to be paired with a good rest ethic.
You touch on that in the book too, and I wanted to hear you riff on it a little bit more. But the Protestant work ethic, like that's such a deeply ingrained thing. Not just, I mean, it I don't know, it's always attributed to the Dutch culture. I don't know if it originated there necessarily, but like how is that affected, positively or negatively your understanding of the work rest thing? I think that's a great way to frame it.
Yeah. So my dad's a Dutch immigrant. He was born in Nazi occupied Holland in 1944. And then I lived in Holland from age 3, the Netherlands from age 3 to almost age 7. And so I'm Dutch genetically. I'm Dutch culturally. I'm Dutch every which way. I used to think most of my life that I was a jerk, and about 5 years ago, I realized no, I'm just Dutch. And which is quite a revelation because in the Netherlands nobody would think twice about my personality, but being blunt and forthright and all the things
Yeah.
in American culture, you're kind of on the extreme of being matter of fact, of being direct, of all those kinds of things. But my dad had multiple jobs from the time he got to the U.S. Age 8 on, right? His family needed that. After school, he was, knocking on doors and selling flowers, and eventually working in bowling alleys and restaurants, and so I think that's a big part of why he saw the value of work for me, even at a young age, right? So I was steeped in it in terms of a Dutch framework most of my life, and it does come from religion. John Calvin is where that kind of Protestant work ethic comes from, and the Netherlands was a big Protestant country, so it's very Calvinistic. So you hear the phrase Dutch Calvinist if you're in religious circles or whatnot. And he was very austere, no art, no jewelry, no whatever. And so everything was about, kind of what you're doing. But I think when we talk about American, Protestant work ethic, religion gets used to drive commerce in a lot of twisted ways. In the South, you would have slave owners creating out of the people that worked on their plantation somebody to do church services or to preach to the other slaves, and they would pressure them to preach out of Peter and other places where it says, slaves, be beholden to your masters. And it was using religion as a form of control for the slave or production class, right? So you see religion being used that way. I also think in a broader sense, capitalism uses religion and the Protestant work ethic. Don't be a sloth, don't be whatever,
Right.
be responsible, as a way of trying to get a workforce that sees their obligation, their religious obligation, as having a duty to perform and to do it without complaining or grumbling or whatever it might be.
Or
Um,
doing it without sleep, maybe.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. You talk about trauma. I have a couple. I want to go a couple different directions, a little bit deeper with this, because this is where I feel like it starts to overlap with so many different areas. But what are the ways that you have observed men being conditioned to ignore, minimize, um, compensate for like their trauma? What are the ways that men are conditioned to just avoid that altogether? What do you see?
Yeah, so I think this is a very important question. Uh, so we're not very trauma informed, no matter what we tell ourselves. We're not very trauma informed in society. Certainly, I think men being raised in kind of masculine cultures get no discussion about the emotions or trauma or anything. And I think the biggest piece of that is misunderstood, ignored, not even considered is our nervous system. And I can only speak from my experience, but I went almost 50 years as a highly educated person thinking that the nervous system really only existed to tell me that if you pinched my toe that hurt, right? Or maybe that it carried electrical impulses so that my heart continues to beat without me realizing it. It kind of just regulates kind of the on-off switches or the buttons or whatever. That might have been the extent of my understanding of the nervous system. I didn't understand that emotions are carried in the body. I didn't understand that the body keeps the score, meaning our life experiences, especially the ones that are very high on the Richter scale, um, vestiges of those experiences get stored as energy or memory in different parts of our body. Our organs carry memories in very strange ways. And this nervous system regulates all of that, right? And so when you overwork in your 20s, you're tired. In your 30s, you begin to mind over matter and use your willpower to kind of keep driving, keep driving, keep driving. But that whole time in your 20s, that whole time in your 30s, your nervous system is slowly beginning to feel the effects of that.
Mm,
And then you get to a point where you have a compromised nervous system, mild effects of a nervous breakdown or significant effects of a nervous breakdown, but your life circumstances don't change. So the demand on your body is the same or greater than it's ever been. Your capacity to produce and to absorb the difficulty, the challenge, are beginning to split. And the longer that split goes and the deeper or greater that split becomes, we get closer and closer to burnout. And what begins to happen here with men, especially, is we look for ways to regulate a dysfunctional or dysregulated nervous system.
mm,
We don't know what's going on. We just know that we have to somehow, it's like we crave to regulate and feel grounded, feel strength again, feel wholeness again. And so we begin to find things that work. We don't know why they work. We don't even think about what's happening, but our bodies feel that they work. So we slowly begin to grab those things. And those things are what we typically call escapes, right? So
Yeah.
porn addiction,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
alcohol, drugs, whatever it might be that people find, and they begin to use that to offset the dysfunction in their nervous system. And then those things actually begin to, over time, compromise the nervous system even more,
yeah.
which creates a greater craving for whatever that thing is. And if we keep going down those paths, that's where we get to addiction. And eventually, that's when you see uh, significant breaks,
Yeah.
broken families, loss of job, complete nervous breakdowns that then lead to PTSD. Uh, you know, people acting out in ways that they never thought they would have acted out, and it's all beginning out of really these nervous systems that have been dysregulated for so long.
Hearing you, I've known you for a while, and hearing you describe that progression from the 20s to the 30s, like that sounds, a lot of that sounds like biographical for you. Like that was your progression, but it's also like hearing you describe that it describes in many ways to a T the men that we engage with, in the work that we do at Epic, men that are active in buying sex. That's one of those things that they do because they're so dysregulated.
Dysregulated and isolated.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and so if we don't understand what's going on in our body first, and if culture doesn't understand trauma or what's going on in our bodies, and if culture doesn't allow men to ask for help, that's three layers of inability to talk to others about, man, I just can't keep going the way I'm going.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I don't know what to do about it. And so the longer that goes, where all of that is internal, that is incredibly isolating. And when you're that lonely on the inside, it only fuels those behaviors that come out of isolation.
yeah. I that is the reality for so many of the men that we've worked with. As I was reading your book and thinking about my own struggles, um, I may call you at 3 a.m. someday, if if it gets
I'll
as
probably be up. Yeah.
but I was thinking I had an experience, and I want to just share some of this and some of the feedback that I solicited from some friends of mine. But I had a friend; she's become a very dear friend in the work that we do. Known her for years, and her best friend, both of whom are renowned leaders in the space, survivors of both trafficking and domestic violence. They were here in the Portland area years ago, doing some work with us and doing some training, and we had a gap between meetings, and wasn't enough time for them to go back to their hotels. So we just came to my house. I had just finished building what was supposed to be just a redo of my back deck, but it turned into this 300 square foot addition. But it's basically an enclosed porch. It was a rainy day. I was sitting there with the two of them in that room. They were sitting on a couch together, and as we're talking, both of them fell into a deep, deep sleep.
Mm.
It was just something soothing, and felt really safe about the experience. But I always felt like that was like a real sacred moment. So I quietly kind of backed out of the room, closed the door, and they slept for a couple of hours, just crashed out on the couch. These are women that have experienced deep, deep trauma. I didn't realize until much later what a big deal that was. So I reached out to pull up the text thread from one of them, and I told them I was going to have this conversation with you. I said, so the question I asked them was, how was your sleep impacted during your exploitation? So the trauma that they were experiencing daily, beyond what any of us would ever experience. And so I got I asked several of them the question. So I want to just share their responses with you. And then I want to just get your feeling, and just I haven't shared this with you, obviously, but she responded, she said, "Hey, I was never allowed to sleep any length of time. I still don't sleep more than 4 hours at any given stretch. And if I'm awakened by anything, loud noise, sick kid, whatever, I don't fall back asleep because my nervous system goes into hyper overdrive and can't wind back down." That sounds very familiar. "I get triggered when someone wakes me up, even if they're gentle or doing it because I asked them to." And then she said, "Sleep deprivation is a very common and effective tool used by traffickers." Same question to another friend. Pull up hers. Uh, this is a good friend I've known. She said, "I think my sleep had no pattern." This was when she was being exploited. It was a luxury, depended on how much money you could make in the 24 hours allotted. "I slept on public transit when I was too tired, and my pimp sent me on BART." She was trafficked in the Bay Area. "I remember falling asleep and struggling to walk once in Honolulu when I had a shopping cart and lived in the peep shows parking lots. I remember being dragged from my sleep violently beaten awake by her trafficker. I remember wanting to sleep so bad, but was not allowed." She said, and then she said, there were times I slept so hard, who knows what happened to me during those times." So when she did get to sleep, it was literally, risking her life. Let me just share one more. And I just want to get your thoughts on this. This was a woman, let's see. She said she's been out, and also all three of these women have been out of their exploitation for well over a decade, probably closer to 2 decades now. But she said, another friend said, "I have hyperactivity disorder, so my brain is still very busy when I sleep. I've had chronic nightmares since my first memories that didn't change much during prostitution, except now I dream about the men rather than other types of nightmares. After exiting, I continued dreaming about the men in those nightmares, maybe even more, because now I wasn't as dissociated as I was then. Went to therapy, did some somatic therapy, and it helped a great deal. But she says, it's still a 50-50 chance."
Yeah.
Um, and then the last one that I reached out to, she had been exploited from the time she was a kid in the foster care system. And again, she's been out of it. She's in her mid 40s. She goes, "I still don't sleep." So you have this. What I find so tragic is you have the men, like we were talking about just a minute ago,
Yeah.
that are looking for a way to deal with this stress and trauma, and they're finding these women that are then traumatized. Like it's just such a perfect storm of trauma. Like when you hear that from women, what comes to mind? What's your reaction?
Well, couple different threads, and those are extreme cases, and I think extreme cases always highlight things very well for us,
Yeah,
right? Um, I think the first thing is just in general, everything in life begets kind of the same thing. So hurt people hurt people. People that are being exploited exploit people. The oppressed become the oppressor. On the flip side, grace begets grace, love begets love. You know what I'm saying? So the first thing I hear is just, you know, our society is built where we're human batteries. And when we're being used that way and then we feel like we're used up, um, I do think that human nature is to try and figure out how I'm going to take something to try to satisfy or fill back that tank.
yeah,
And then we stop caring about what it does to the person that's being exploited. A lot of this is post-industrial. It doesn't mean industrialization is bad. It just means for illustrative purposes. When people own their own land, and didn't have to pay a mortgage, they could take a break as
Yeah.
long as they had food to eat, or they had neighbors that would care for them. They could take a break. If we stop running now on that hamster wheel, um, we know deep inside that the wheels will come off. If I stop working and making money, then I'm going to lose my house. If I lose my house, I lose my credit. If I lose my credit, you know what I mean? Like, and so there's this sense in which even when we're exhausted, we can't collapse. Like we can't take a break and recharge naturally. And that creates desperation, and people do really bad things out of desperation. A drowning person will pull down the lifeguard with them, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of one of the things that comes to mind. The second one is has to do with safety. We talked about the nervous system and the animal brain, and I think it's really important as we take the testimony of those women and say, how does that then inform my understanding of my life? Your listeners that might be dealing with sleeplessness, the nervous system and the animal brain, right? I was watching a movie with the kids the other day on the Yorkshire Ripper, who was somebody that was killing prostitutes, I think in the 70s in England. And there's one scene where a policeman in a car is with one of these young prostitutes, and it's basically saying, have you ever had somebody that just didn't feel right, that just made you feel a little unsafe, that made you feel whatever, like what's your intuition tell you? Did you have somebody like that? And she just looked at him kind of deadpan and was like, well, that's all of them, isn't it? You know, and what she was saying is there's nothing safe about being exploited in such a deeply personal way. It cuts to our nervous system and our sense of safety at every turn. Now, carrying that over to the average person, if you look at animals, right? So thinking about the animal brain is easiest when when we think of animals. My dog sleeps underneath our bed. Why? It's like a cave. Have you ever seen an animal just sleep in the wide open, or do they have their back to something? Or do they go into the back of a cave, or do they get underneath some branches? My cat, which is very skittish, like most cats, when she's resting in the backyard, it's under the Chase Lounge. It's There's something about the nervous system, the animal brain, that knows that when you're exposed, the threat is greatest.
Mm.
When you are in a place where you've limited what can come at and threaten you, your risk factor goes way down, which means you can relax a little bit more, feel a little bit safer, and therefore you can let go and surrender. You can rest, you can sleep. Humans are the same way. Our animal brain, our nervous systems, if they feel at risk, if they feel threatened, they can't cycle down and surrender and truly let go and get deep rest or deep sleep. And you just said it, with kids, it's snakes under the bed, right? As adults, it's what's coming for my job, who's coming for my job, what's going to happen if I lose my mortgage, what's going to, et cetera. And how do you gain a cave or separation from that kind of mental or abstract stress, right? And that's a form of exploitation. Like, you're in a system that won't allow you to let go or rest, that doesn't care ultimately about your health because you're replaceable, just like in football, next man up, right?
Yeah.
So if you can't do your job, someone else can do your job. And so nothing else is saying we care about taking that pressure off you. And we don't have the resources to know how to separate from that kind of stress. And so again, 50 years of my life, I wasn't taught about breathing. I wasn't taught about meditation or mindfulness. I wasn't taught about writing down the stresses of the day on a piece of paper and putting them somewhere else outside of my bedroom so that I know that they're there, they're captured. I can look at them in the morning so I don't have to try and remember them tonight, right?
Yeah.
I didn't learn about, a wind down period. If I'm watching stressful movies right up till 10:30 and then I go straight to bed, my nervous system hasn't been able to shift gears or wind down, unplug. I mean, we know these phrases, right? I need to unplug before I go to bed. We intuitively know all these things, but we're not consciously aware of what that dynamic or that need is. And it's really a need for separation from stress, relaxation of the nervous system, preparing ourselves to feel safe and good. Why do we read stories to kids before bed? We want them to relax and to feel safe, right?
Yeah.
Like we know that we want kids to feel safe. We hug them and tuck them in. The last thing they see is us kissing them on the forehead. Why are we doing that? We're instinctively doing that to create a sense of calm and a sense of safety. So really the question for us is, and I think everyone has to kind of wrestle with that, but we all need, our animal brains, our nervous systems need that sense of safety in order to rest, in order to sleep. How can we intentionally try and create those dynamics? Get the TV out of the bedroom. Don't look at the phone and the news, global news right before you go to bed. Don't, whatever. Like, create your bedroom like a cave, cold, safe, away from the door.
Yeah.
Lock the door if you need to. But what are the symbolic things that are going to make our animal brains feel like we actually can feel safe and protected, and therefore let go, just like the dog, just like the cat.
Yeah.
And if we don't do that, we're digging grooves into our brain night after night after night, like what happened to these poor women, that we're then going to have to deal with through time, over time, and are going to affect the quality of our lives.
Yeah. You do two things in the book that I really appreciate. You talk about the physiological, the neural pathways, the grooves that get dug into our lives through habits and through trauma and experiences. But then you also reframe sleep and rest as something that's deeply communal,
Yeah.
and spiritual, rather than just biological or physiological. Um, how does framing it that way, specifically of it being a spiritual and communal thing, how does that challenge some of the prevailing masculine norms? Like, what are the ways that would make it either difficult or maybe make it even more natural and intuitive for men to really engage this through that lens of a spiritual and communal way? Like, how can
Yeah.
men
Well,
help each
let's
other? I think
just
what
say,
I'm saying is, how can
yeah,
how can men encourage each other in
yeah.
this regard?
I think I'll just start with saying the obvious. If I don't let my dog have peace and quiet and safety, my dog's not going to sleep, right? If the pimp or someone that's trying to use harsh interrogation methods on some kind of prisoner isn't going to let them sleep, they're not going to sleep, right? So if we culturally can take away people's sleep, the opposite is true too. We can create conditions and contexts where it helps other people sleep. We don't live in isolation from one another. Life is inherently interconnected. Okay. So we have life inherently interconnected on one hand, and I think we have most cultures throughout history, whether it's indigenous cultures, whether it's cultures in Asia, whether it's cultures in different parts of the world, that are much more collectivistic than ours. So they map onto that reality that everything's interconnected and build their cultural understanding around that. America, our one big contribution, maybe one of two big contributions to the world of philosophy, is American individualism. And that comes from the immigrant story. It comes from the fact that we believed you could pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And it comes into our philosophical thinking through really Ralph Waldo Emerson and people that really dug into this idea of self-reliance. And I think there's obviously positive things that can come from that, a sense of agency, a sense of possibility, a sense of determination. The people that like capitalism, they would say they like it because it allows people to be motivated and pursue their dreams, right? So there's obviously some positive things that kind of come from that, but there's also this negative thing, which is it's intention from the fact that everything's interrelational and interconnected. And so culturally, when we end up in this, I have to be an individual, I have to be self-reliant, I can't ask for help, I have to prove myself against other people's willingness to be an individual. We end up with this isolated masculinity in a world that was built for interconnectedness. And I think that's one of the fundamental dysfunctions of American masculinity. And we're not the only country that has dysfunctional masculinity.
Yeah.
But think of football. You're a football player. What happens if you take yourself out of the game because of an injury? Nobody asks, well, what is this actually a legitimate injury? Everyone makes an assessment of your toughness and your manhood based on the fact that you didn't tough it out, play through the pain, do whatever it takes to help the team, et cetera. And so we're taught from a very young age that if it's going to be, it has to be up to me. I can't depend on other people. And not only that, but they're watching and they're judging. So if I show weakness, that becomes my character to them. If I show that I can't do it, I'm incapable, I'm not strong enough, powerful enough, that becomes my reputation, that becomes my image, it becomes how people view me. And so there's this internal pressure to keep pushing and keep putting on this front. And in football, that leads to injuries that get worse and worse over time and might cost somebody their career, right? Mm-hmm. In the work world, where it's not physical in the way of ankles and knees and backs, but it's physical in terms of mental capacity, nervous system, et cetera, trauma, pushing through the pain in the work world doesn't lead to bad back, knee injuries or ankle injuries. It leads to burnout. It leads to acting out. It leads to conflict. You know what I mean? Like it produces a different kind of ultimate failure. And we've got this kind of set up in our American kind of psyche. And somehow, and that this is where men that are listening to this are going to get frustrated. They're going to go, great. So you're telling me I need to be able to rely on others and find help. But no one else is thinking that way, right? Like you've just made the problem worse for me. I'm now going to stress about stress.
So how do we get around that? Because that's exactly what I'm feeling as you're explaining it. Like, how do we help each other then?
The way you fight against the tide can't be in small measures. So when you're talking about culture doesn't change. And individual people have a hard time changing culture. So it has to have high intentionality and be very focused. Why do people in the military develop such deep brotherhood? And they learn to depend on each other, right? Because they're brought into an environment where that is the culture and where all of life gets shaped around the guy to your left and the guy to your right, right? So I think in the short run, the only way that you create that is to say, how do we replicate that, but in real life, with businessmen, with men that are saying, hey, I am strong, but I'm also human. And I want to be in a discipleship group or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So I think this is where the greater isolation that social media, artificial intelligence, lack of church or civic engagement. There's a lot of other things happening in society right now that are actually moving us further and further away from those kind of deep bonds that would be needed. So what I'd say is if someone in a group of people wanted that, they would have to create that small group. Someone once said that the healthiest the most spiritual people in any community are the ones that are in the 12-step group. There's the most grace. There's the most acceptance. There's the most regularity. There's the most honest sharing. There's a system that people can lean on and build into. There's a mentoring capacity. There's a truth-telling kind of ethic to it. There's a normalization of struggle. And so I've reflected on it. And, I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
So again, if it's not going to be Band of Brothers, like, how do we actually create environments that replicate some of what would be in a 12-step group? And that's not going to happen just by wishful thinking.
So it's just the intentionality part of it, like you're talking about.
Yeah.
What is, I want to kind of give you the last word here, especially for the men listening. You've already mentioned, I think, and I would agree, the most important thing is building intentional, healthy community within our lives, and that could look a bunch of different ways. In addition to that, can you recommend maybe one thing that we could implement or try, even in the next few days, that could move us towards being more rested men in the fullest sense of that? Like what is something you would recommend?
Yeah, I'm going to move away from magic bullets or self-help. And I'm going to make a dangerous generalization here, but gendered generalizations can be very destructive, and they obviously don't hold true across the board.
Mm.
That being said, when you're talking about masculinity, inherent in masculinity is that we tend to learn things first with our thinking self, and that our thinking self, if we're going to apply stuff, has to kind of internalize or own subject matter knowledge, understanding, etc. So I think the single greatest thing, and this isn't self-serving, it could be my book or different books, but I think the single greatest thing is pick up a book on rest or sleep or balance and read it, because there's something about reading where we tend to get to learn and own information, knowledge, understanding within our own agency. It's not somebody else telling us what to do. It's not somebody else you shoulding us. We shouldn't should all over people, that saying. There's something about the process of reading where we get to kind of interact with the subject on our own terms, and digest and take away the parts that we need. And it's a process. It's not kind of a one-time thing. And so I would say the single greatest thing that I would recommend to all people is, you probably haven't read a book on this subject. So do like you would with anything else, with golf or with your business or with money in the stock market or whatever it might be. Actually take it on as a subject to study.
Yeah, that's awesome. Last question. I appreciate your wisdom because I know it's harder and it's not, this is not academic for you. So I really appreciate that. As you have learned, been learning, continue to learn about what real rest looks like just in your own life. What brings you when you wake up in the morning, even if you've been awake at 3 a.m., when you wake up these days in the morning, what are the things that bring you joy?
Yeah, it's a profound question, actually. I think they're the things that bring all people joy: sunshine, birds chirping, knowing that my family's still here and loves me, whatever it might be. I would say on the most difficult days, it's remembering that I have agency, even if I lose all things in my life. Viktor Frankl, the famous psychologist that was in I think Auschwitz, kind of wrote about this, that at the end of the day, the one thing that nobody can take from you is choice, the choice to rise above circumstances, that you have agency. that it does, that ultimately your own happiness doesn't depend on anybody else. Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you choose to react to it. Your attitude is what belongs to you. That's a Chuck Swindoll quote. And then I think so that's just human nature, just anchoring ourselves in that. I think for me, it's allowing myself to hit snooze several times
Mm.
because my blood pressure is lowest in the morning. My heart rate is lowest. My trauma is the least. And just laying in bed and feeling the regularity of my breath, opening my hands, not closed, but and then laying them on the sheet around me, and just feeling that sense of calm and that that's okay.
Mm.
Um, that I'm a hard worker, regardless of whether I take my mornings in a slow manner. Brings me a lot of joy. Um, and I think for the men that are listening, um, yeah, the knowledge that whatever happened in the night, that one night isn't going to determine the whole of your life. Like, no matter how bad your sleep was that night, you're not the only one. There's several billion people every night that also struggled with sleep, and
Yeah.
yet the world turns. And so the joy to be able to brush off bad nights without having to act like it's the end of the world.
Yeah. Ken Wytsma, I appreciate you. Appreciate uh, your mind and your heart for these things. So thank you for sharing all of this so freely.
I appreciate you having me. Thanks, Tom.